Yeah, yeah, okay.
Bye.
My name's Christy Gardner, and I'm a pediatric dietitian at the University of Miami, and I work under the pediatric department, and I work specifically with the pediatric, the Division of Pediatric Gastroenterology, Hepatology, and Nutrition. So pretty much everything dealing with nutrition, the GI, and the liver.
Okay. And just to know more about us, we're in a club named HOSA for Tier Environmental Research Institutes, and we're gonna be performing a project on ultra processed foods. So yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So just to begin with the interview, this is gonna be the first question. How do you define ultra processed foods?
So how do you define?
Yeah, what is your definition of ultra processed foods?
Okay. So pretty much ultra processed foods. So there's different levels of processing. Obviously, the more less processed foods are going to be things that you find straight from the ground, and then as we kind of refine them. So let's take like wheat, for example, right? So you get like the wheat husk, and then you go through one processing through the milling, and then so that's one level of processing. It would then be considered like an ultra processed food if it's something like let's say potato chips, or things that are like packaged foods in particular. So ultra processed foods is different than, for example, frozen vegetables, which technically, if vegetables are frozen, then they are processed. There is like a level of processing. However, it's much different than, let's say, like veggie chips, or those type of like, that form of vegetables. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it did. And
Yeah.
where can we find most of these processed foods?
So these processed foods you can find, in supermarkets. You can find, especially in like vending machines. You can find them in, when you're out like at sporting events. They're usually more like what we call like the convenience foods. So that they can be found everywhere. A lot of people's pantries have them as well. So in the home, in the grocery store, and in our environment.
Okay, thank you.
Just out of curiosity, what is a way to identify foods that are processed?
So again, kind of going back to like my initial, I guess you can say, definition of processed foods. So the way that you can identify a food that is processed is if it didn't grow out of the ground like that, So, so for example, there is no, potato chip plant, but there are potatoes. So, so a food that is processed is going to be anything that is not in its like natural form, and easy way to kind of identify it is usually they come in a bag, in a container. They're going to have like a nutrition facts label as well, and an ingredient list. So, because it's modified from its original form.
Okay.
All right. What would the ideal plate or diet for people look like to eat? Like, what should be on the plate or in their diet?
Okay. So everybody's, there is no like perfect diet. Everybody's diet is very individualized for each person, based off of your culture, as well as your likes and your dislikes. However, more of like a general terms is how a plate should look like, is going to be more thinking, if you think of the plate more as like, you know, a circle, that usually our plates are a circle. I'm not sure if you're familiar with like the My Plate guidelines from
Yeah.
myplate.gov. Okay, so similar to that, where you want to have about 75%, or sorry, not 75. Well, yeah, 75% of your plate coming from either fruits, vegetables, or grains, and 25% of that coming from a protein source. So that protein can be meat, fish, poultry, pork, eggs. It could also be something like legumes or nuts as well. And then 50% of your plate being composed of like vegetables. And when I say vegetables, I mean more of like the fibrous vegetables. So not necessarily potatoes. So something more like leafy greens, or tomatoes, cucumbers, different peppers. So more of those crunchy vegetables, where they, like more of the starchy vegetables like potatoes, corn, even peas, and some like root and tuber vegetables are going to be more of that starch, which you want to have about 25% of your plate being from starch.
Okay.
Okay.
My next question is it challenging to alter the diet of people whose diet mostly consists of processed foods?
I mean, so I do work a lot. I mean, I work with a lot of kids in particular who have what's called fatty liver. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with fatty liver, but and obviously because it's kids, it's non-alcoholic fatty liver. But typically I do see a lot of processed foods being consumed in their diets. So it can be a challenge, depending on their socioeconomic status. It can be a challenge, depending on, you know, their built environment, how accessible fresh or even frozen or canned fruits or vegetables may be. So there's more to eating healthy or eating more of a balanced plate than just you know, what you choose at the grocery store. A lot of it can be kind of also contributed towards kind of like social determinants of health. But it can be challenging, but usually you want to start with small steps and small changes.
Okay. And I know that ultra processed foods are tasty and a lot of people consume them, but why are they so addicting?
So foods are technically not addicting. I know like we think of like sugar is addicting, or but technically sugar is not addicting. So what happens with ultra processed foods is ultra processed foods are very refined. They tend to be comprised of high levels of added sugars. I'm not for sure if you guys are familiar with NHANES.
Not really, no.
Okay, no worries. So it's usually more like popular with like dietitians and nutritionists. And I'm sure when you guys are in college, you'll possibly, if you go down the health field, which it seems like you all do have interest in, will become more familiar with NHANES. So NHANES is a national survey. It stands for the National Health. Oh, I should know this by the back of my head. NH, so National Health Examination, or National Health Assessment Examination, something with nutrition. So pretty much they look at the country and they see, they do this huge survey. They with like thousands and thousands of Americans, and they look at what they're eating. They take different anthropometric values, and it's a really interesting and cool, like, you know, study. So if you guys are interested in kind of like population health, then I would say definitely take a look at NHANES and like the data and what they do, and maybe some of the research. But so with ultra processed foods, and sorry, I feel like I went on a tangent. What was the question again?
Why are they so addicting, right? Why is it so light?
Right. So ultra processed foods are very refined. There's usually a lot of added sugars or added fillers, gums, carrageenans, emulsifiers, all these different ingredients that can be kind of actually harmful for our gut health, which is like a totally different topic. But they tend to be comprised of very little protein and like not, very little protein and very little fiber, which those two ingredients are helpful with making us feel more full and giving us a feeling of satiety, as we like to say. So if you're eating a lot of sugars or carbohydrates that are more starchy, that's going to leave you feeling maybe like full or satisfied for a very short period of time. And then you're going to want to have more of, like, I don't know, let's say you had an example of some, like, I don't know, I keep saying potato chips, but that's just that keeps popping in my mind. So you're going to want to have more of that ultra processed food because number one, it's convenient and it's easy. You don't have to do a whole lot. And number two, it's just carbs, and your body physiologically, when you're hungry, you crave carbs. So you're going to crave more of those carbs, not that those are addicting, but just it's what your body wants. And then you have some, and then you just never end up feeling fully satisfied or or full. So, there's a lot of misconception as far as like foods being addicting.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
See you again, Juliana.
So what can be a big way that people notice the issues of ultra processed foods? Like how big the issue has become?
Sorry, can you repeat the question again?
What can be a way people notice how big the issue of ultra processed food has become? Like how can they be self-aware?
Okay, so like how, people can be more mindful about the process.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a better way to phrase it. Yeah.
I don't know. That's a difficult. I mean, I feel like through possibly education, they could maybe become more aware. I mean, usually people, I don't know. I don't know how people can become more aware of ultra processed foods. I mean, they're kind of all over the place. But yeah, so I'm not sure how to answer that question.
Yeah, that's why we asked. Yeah. Okay.
Do you have any advice on people to have a healthier lifestyle?
Yeah, I mean, I think that question again, like, is very individual based. What might be like a healthy lifestyle for me might be different for you or for everybody here in the call. So what I usually like to say is, just try to eat more plants. Usually that's one thing that most of us are missing in our life, or not having enough of, myself included on certain days. So try to eat more fresh foods. I mean, it can also be frozen foods as well. Like there's nothing wrong with frozen foods. And just try to eat foods in their more natural form. So, again, there's no such thing as like a potato tree, or not a potato tree, a potato chip tree. But there are like, potatoes from the ground, and there's nothing wrong with potatoes, even though they are more of a carb or a starch. And then also trying to find some form of movement, or exercise movement, whatever you want to call it, that you can incorporate into your daily routine. So that way you can stay moving, and fueling yourself with good foods.
Okay. And does anybody have any more questions from our group?
I have a question. Do you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, just making sure. So you talked about like ultra processed foods and then like the actual food itself not being addicting, but isn't there like those sugars and like extra fats not being addicting? Like, isn't there like a chemical process like within the brain that produces like serotonin and dopamine, like an excess amount that makes them addicting?
So
Did you get that?
there's like, yeah. So there's like controversy with that. So it's not the same response that you get from like the addiction of a drug, which they're two like different things where you become literally like physically addicted and like physically reliant on those like, you know, drugs, where with an addiction or, you know, or with foods, we have receptors in our mouth, and then we have receptors in our gut, that kind of the receptors in our mouth will then signal the receptors in our gut to like, oh look, like we're getting, and then also within our brain, because brain gut is very you know, involved with each other. So they will signal each other that look, there's you know, a high sugar like food coming down the pipeline, and make sure you have enough receptors for this and whatnot. So our bodies do adapt for that, but we do not become like scratching like you know, like a drug addict for sugar or for fat, especially for fat, but you know, usually sugar's the one that is more, you know, the proponent.
What about like, I heard like disorders in like the hypothalamus, like some like in the hypothalamus, like there's it doesn't detect the amount of food you intake, and those sensory receptors in the gut, it the hypothalamus doesn't process, so you end up like eating like an excess amount of food or like under eating. Like, is there any like treatments for that?
So I'm not sure. So what I'm relating to is the receptors for carbohydrates. So where they signal to kind of increase receptors in the gut. So with that, there's usually there's usually not a dysregulation. Our bodies are pretty efficient with regulating those things. But what occurs actually when you have, for example, sugar alcohols or these like sweet, like, you know, like pretty much fake sugars, those like sweeteners. So like Splenda, even stevia does this as well, where it has a very, very sweet taste in the mouth. And then your brain then signals to your gut, you have a lot of sugar coming soon. So then you actually end up producing more receptors to absorb the nutrition in your small intestine. And then you do actually end up like absorbing more, you know, calories and more nutrition through that way. I'm not sure if that's what you're relating to.
Oh yeah, that was good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Alrighty, well, that about wraps it up. Thank you so much, Christy.
Okay,
Yes,
great. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I hope I was able to answer, you know, you guys' questions and didn't go on too many tangents, but definitely look into the NHANES data. There's actually some really interesting data that came out a couple of years ago in regards to ultra processed foods and like children in particular. And it even found that like 65 or 62 or 65% of the calories that children and teens consumed actually came from ultra processed foods. And 92% of the calories from added sugars were from those foods. So by decreasing the amount of ultra processed foods, we're going to be able to decrease the amount of added sugars, which in my experience, as I do work in GI and hepatology, does help with liver health, as well as other GI disorders.
Okay.
Okay. So
Well, I think that's it. Thank you,
Thank you.
and have a great day.
Have a great
Take care.
day. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.